A Sunday school teacher asked her class on the Sunday before Easter if they knew what happened on Easter and why it was so important. One little girl spoke up saying, "Yeah, Easter is when the whole family gets together and you eat turkey and talk about the pilgrims and all that stuff." "No, that's not quite it," said the teacher. "I know what Easter is," the second student responded. "Easter is when you get a tree and decorate it, and you give gifts to everybody and you sing lots of songs." "No, that's not quite right either," the teacher replied. Finally, after a thoughtful silence, a third student spoke up. "Easter is when Jesus is killed, put in a tomb, and left for 3 days." "Oh, thank goodness. Somebody knows," the teacher thought to herself. But then the student went on. "Then everybody gathers at the tomb and waits to see if Jesus will come out. And if he sees a shadow, he has to go back inside for 6 more weeks of winter." The teacher was a bit flummoxed. And given the chill in the air of late, that may not be super far off. We've had some nippy mornings. But I love this little story because it brings up a good point. What actually happens on Easter Sunday? What happened on that first Easter? The children in that class, unbeknownst to them, were actually in very good company in puzzling out this answer. The first disciples to stumble upon the empty tomb were just as confused as to what had occurred. Peter and John hear that the stone has been rolled away, Mary tells them. So they race to the site. Their confusion grows upon seeing Jesus' burial clothes neatly laid out, but there is no body. We have heard this story often enough so that it does not truly surprise us. It makes the story difficult to translate to today's ears. But I invite us to try to hold that aside for a moment and put yourselves in the disciples' sandals. Your friend has died. You and your friends saw it happen. The body was taken to the funeral home for preparation prior to a service. You return just before the public viewing, but you're greeted by the funeral director who stammers out, I don't know how to say this, but we have a problem. Come with me." He takes you back into the embalming room, points to the casket, and instead of your dear friend lying there, all you see is the suit in which he was to be buried, lying limp like a glove that has just been removed, with the Bible that was to be placed in his hand sitting on top of it. But the body's gone. How would you feel? And what would you think had happened? Let's up the ante a bit. You were, in fact, part of an illegal organization with this dead, now missing friend of yours. The feds are looking for anyone who was associated with your friend, and you have been implicated. What do? Do you stick around and wait to be found, or do you go somewhere else, somewhere a bit safer? Our passage continues by saying that Peter and John did not understand that Jesus had been risen. For them, this could have been their turkey Thanksgiving for all the sense it made. It was way too far out of their realm of experience of the natural order of things to believe that Jesus was alive. They didn't get it. They also knew they couldn't stay there. They go back home, undoubtedly scratching their heads in total and utter confusion. What happened on Easter? They didn't have the faintest clue. They were children who were confused and grieving and trying to make sense of all of this. And so, of course, they leave Mary at the tomb, because that makes sense. Mary is weeping. She also really doesn't have a grasp as to what is going on either. We simply see her overcome with grief at the loss of her friend and teacher. The scene of Jesus dying helplessly on the cross, this is just a few days old. And those were graphic images, right? They hadn't gone away. So she is sitting there with her memories of this. And now Jesus has disappeared, his body taken somewhere else. Disciples have scattered, leaving Mary to mourn alone at the foot of his empty grave. For Mary, this is just more salt in the wound. Another day of pain and grief. Through her weeping, she sees two men at the tomb and expresses her despair over Jesus' missing body. A kindly gardener addresses her and she begs him, "Please, sir, tell me where you have taken him. Where is he?" And then the characters in the story realize that something different has happened. Mary realizes this with a single word, a word that pierces into the core of her soul and causes the veil before her eyes to fall away. The stranger says, "Mary." And upon hearing her name, Mary realizes precisely what has happened on that first Easter morning. Her sadness turns to something different, a stunned understanding. "Rabboni," she breathes, acknowledging this man not as stranger, but as much beloved teacher and friend. Mary, unlike the other disciples who have left, sees Jesus, and I can't imagine she fully comprehends how this is possible, but she believes that she is in the presence of the risen one. There's something that happens upon hearing your name uttered by someone who loves you. It can be enough to melt my heart to hear my name spoken by my husband or my mom or someone who knows me in the most intimate ways possible, because it communicates much more to me than simply the name Jill. It communicates that they see me and that they know me and have known me for so long and accept me at the heart of my being. My identity is understood by these people, and I'm loved at the deepest possible level. Names are powerful. And for Mary, in her place of despair, hearing her name in that unmistakable, loving voice shocks her out of her grief. I'm reminded of that classic theme song from the TV show Cheers. You all know the one, right?
Sometimes you want to go where everybody knows your name. You can sing this, you know how it goes. And everyone is glad you came. You want to be where you can see our troubles are all the same. You want to be where everyone knows your name. That's it.
We got that cue right.
Yeah, we did that. I had to figure it out. I can't sing it near key, though. I had
That
to
was
drop
good.
it down.
Thank you, Bruce. You can cross that one off the list of songs you never expected to hear on Easter Sunday in church.
I like the lyrics, though.
Yeah, there's a powerful message here. How much do we all want to be somewhere where everybody, or even somebody important, knows our name? We do want to be where we can see that people are always glad we came, where our troubles are all the same. Mary did too, and when Jesus said her name, it caused the scales to fall from her eyes. It opened her heart and allowed her to see a deeper meaning, that Jesus was alive, and so was she. That is what happened on Easter for Mary, but it took a moment for the recognition to dawn on her. It always takes us a little bit of time. She needed to hear her name. She needed to be invited into the unfolding story. So the church, when it is at its best, is a place where everybody knows your name and is always glad you showed up. Sometimes we forget names. And true confessions, I actually have a medical diagnosis that makes it hard for me to remember people's names. I messed one up this morning even. So it is a challenge and a curse for a minister. So I'm working on it. The church, when it's at its best, is a place where we know our names and we're glad that everyone is here. Sometimes we forget as though this were so, just like the dysfunctional family hanging out in the Cheers bar. We do try. The love found in church is rooted in the God who calls us by our names and desires the same intimacy with us that Jesus had with Mary. This is total acceptance, sheer grace, acceptance and belovedness and recognition of each other's belovedness, simply for whom we've been created to be. But the story doesn't end with just acceptance and welcome. After Mary is named and honored, after she joyfully discovers her friend and teacher is alive, she runs to the other disciples to share the news. Jesus commissions her and says, "Go to my brethren and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and to your Father, to my God and to your God." She would become the world's first witness to the resurrection, the first one to tell the greatest story ever told. Those of us who have been walking together on this journey of Lent, we've been talking about stories. We've been talking about hearing and sharing stories. We've turned to our neighbors almost every week and shared a story or a snippet of ourselves. This is a place where folks do know each other and where we care for each other. And we are called to bear witness to the greatest story ever told, stealing that from a title of a movie from 1965. The greatest story ever told. The story that death, what the Apostle Paul would later call the last enemy, has been defeated. It's a great story. And it's a story that bears repeating every Easter Sunday and every day in the way we live. Because when we are named by God, we are also claimed. We are seen and embraced and honored. And part of our identity as beloved children of God is a call. It's a call to share the story with others. Because not only does God know our name, but now, on the other side of the tomb, we know God's name. The scales fall from our eyes, and we see, and we have that connection. Between the listening and the telling, we discover the story of self-sacrifice and of resurrection that is well worth sharing in the name of love until everybody knows that name and that story. How often do we recognize each other as beloved children of God? How often do we recognize that part of ourselves? Sometimes it can take us a minute, right? Sometimes we are like the disciples, afraid, grief-stricken, wanting to be kind of anywhere else because this makes us a little uncomfortable. Sometimes we're like Mary, overcome with despair and with burdens, with the day-to-day living of our lives, that we can find ourselves at tombs mourning things that are no longer dead. There is space for the whole trajectory of emotions. And there is even more space for God, like a parent who calls us over and over and over until our ears are tuned in enough to hear it. Perhaps the name we hear God call is a name we have held as our own since our physical birth. Perhaps it is a name that we have claimed as our own later in our lives. Perhaps it is an identity that we could only give voice to recently. Names matter, and right names matter. But whatever our names are, however we come to know ourselves, God calls us by that, with all the tenderness of a creator who went through life and death to be with us in the most intimate way possible. God knows our name, is always glad we came, not so much to church, that's good too, but to the tomb. To the tomb, because it is at the tomb where we can leave death behind and we can rise to new life. For at the tomb, we become resurrected beings ourselves. We often talk about Jesus becoming a human like us, and that is hugely important, but so often we forget that the story leads us into being resurrected with Jesus. And not at the end of our lives, but right now. Eternal life, beloved of God, does not begin when we die. It begins when we live with the understanding of our part to play in the story that is ongoing, the story of love for this whole world. Just as Jesus has risen, so too have we, and this is the greatest possible of all good news. In accepting the love that God has for us, we have been grafted into death on the cross and then infused with the new life of the resurrection. So this is a big story. It's a story in which we invite all to come and hear. And we have the same charge that Jesus gave to Mary and later to the disciples to proclaim. This incredible story is not only for those of us who found our way to church this morning, but also for those who didn't. And for those who have not yet realized God's incredible, extravagant love for them. The promise of a heavenly parent who loves us that much. The promise of a place to gather where everybody not only knows your name, but where everyone is very glad you came. Because without all of us, the kingdom is not yet complete. Beloved of God, may we be known. May we know that we are known. May everybody we encounter know our name and our true identity as resurrected beings ourselves. And may we live as though it were so, and thus invite others to hear the story with us, to drink it in, at a place where everyone knows they are welcomed, they are loved, and they are part of the ongoing story. It is the greatest story ever told, and it is the greatest story that our still speaking God continues to tell through us, if we have the courage to share it. In the name of God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit.